Hello, good afternoon, folks. Thank you for hopping on our webinar here. Got the top of the hour. We're going to give a couple more minutes for a few more folks to trickle in. I do see we've got Mark on, Jen, Monty, and also Clarence. And as a reminder to you all, we do have national webinars that we provide to our customers nationally. This is an event and webinar that we put together specifically for the North Carolina market. So a lot of folks that'll be joining here are all local to the Carolina area. And as we present and talk to you all, we plan on being engaging because the attendee group is going to be less than a dozen or so. So we can be very, intimate in delivering the messaging that's going to be important to you all. Um, got a couple other folks that have joined us. Thank you for joining us, Patricia. And as a reminder for you, Patricia, there are other folks here joining from just a local presence perspective, the Carolinas, and we do hope to have a couple other folks join. But our team here, are going to be speaking, to you all as just a local group versus some of our national webinars that we do that has just a larger audience and people coming in from all over the country. As we wait to get on to, I've got another account executive on here. His name's David Carrillo. He supports the other half of the Carolinas. He's traveling. And then a few other of our technical members, Ben Smoker, Kevin Morrison. They'll be leading a lot of our conversation today. I'll do a proper intro to them as we dive into here. Just giving ourselves a little bit more time to allow, again, some of the attendees to join us. As we wait, I know at least by me, it just started to get a little cloudy and rainy. I know it's been a bit of a cold week, and I've just been killed with the change of weather and allergies, been coughing like crazy this week. So hopefully my voice comes through clear for you all as we present today. All righty. Well, I know I've given about 3 minutes or so I want to get started with the presentation today. As I mentioned, I'll be leading this webinar for us. I'm Drew Bonner. I've been an account executive for Davenport Group for a little over 3 years, coming on the 3-year mark. And prior to joining Davenport Group, I've spent about 10 years in the value-added reseller community and spent majority of that time in the Houston, Texas market, the last 3 years in the Carolina market. And servicing our customers in the Carolina market, both myself and David Carrillo, is our solutions engineer, Ben Smoker. Ben Smoker has been with Davenport Group a little over 3-4 years now. And prior to that, joined us from Dell Technologies from their CTO group. And the reason why Ben was able to step into this technology officer role and advisor role at Dell was because he himself came from an executive position at a customer in the Carolinas, a healthcare institution. And so Ben, as most of you are familiar with him, really takes a customer's approach while presenting technology. And as he goes through his portion of the presentation today, he's going to be providing some insight into how we got to this opportunity to leverage Azure Stack and how different changes in the environment that we're in today, changes in the industry, such being from Broadcom and VMware, how the changes are relevant to a solution like Azure Stack. So he's going to be keeping in mind y'all's perspective and going through the solution at a high level, but also providing you some updates as it pertains to Azure Stack, as there are updates to the solution for those of you that are familiar with it. And finishing the demonstration today will be Kevin Morrison. Kevin is a part of our delivery engineering group. He is also in North Carolina, just north of Charlotte. And he has a background in our Microsoft practice. I've got a slide I can show you on what our portfolio includes as it pertains to Microsoft. But Kevin is also an engineer of ours on the storage side as well, specifically to the storage portfolio of, PowerScale and even the Azure Stack nodes themselves. So Kevin has firsthand experience installing the solutions that we're going to speak to today, and he'll show you a demo of it. The demo will be brief, and we hope that you guys are interested in wanting to follow up with us on a deeper dive demo, which we're happy to present to you all. Another added benefit to this presentation, we didn't include this on the invite, but it's open to you all, is we'll have a raffle at the end. So please stay to the end, where we will be donating a Yeti cooler for a lucky attendee. So happy to present that to you all. Just please stay till the end of our meeting. And just to provide you guys an update on our portfolio, I've got the next slide. A lot of you are familiar with what we do today as it pertains to data center solutions, because I know all of you on here have been working with us for many years. And you all are very familiar with us as a Dell technology value-added reseller and one of the best in the state. Where we have grown as a company in the last handful of years is continuing that excellence of Dell solutions, but also growing our practice as it pertains to Microsoft. As I mentioned, we've brought on folks like Kevin. And there are other engineers on our team similar to Kevin that are a part of this team, and that team has grown to be equal in terms of headcount of number of engineers, to be equal to that of our data center practice. So when it comes to providing a holistic solution of Microsoft tools, technology with a Dell infrastructure backend, we are the experts to be able to talk to those types of technologies and solutions for you all. So going on to the next slide here, just the deeper dive of what we can do from a Microsoft perspective. We are able to advise around licensing. We are not a EA reseller, an enterprise agreement reseller, especially around government too. For the state of North Carolina, SHI holds a state contract. But we do have a lot of state conversations and licensing conversations for our customers that are leveraging an EA with another partner, just giving them a second opinion. Also talking a lot about Copilot and when that will be released to state and local government. I myself have put together an assessment for one of our government customers around Copilot, a small batch of users, and helping justify the appropriate use cases within this government customer on how it can be leveraged within the city. So that is just one area, and the deeper area we're going to talk about today is around Azure, right? And obviously that is a larger box here on the right of the screen, but specifically talking about how Dell and Microsoft work together to provide customers a solution as it pertains to infrastructure. So this is, again, brief intro maybe around our Microsoft practice, how we've built this expertise in Microsoft, and going to pivot to Ben here to start talking a little bit about, again, the context of Azure Stack, how it came to be, and then he'll be looking to pivot to Kevin after we've given you a little intro to the technology. And then we'll finish with this raffle as well. So thank you all again for joining, and I'll pass it to Ben.
Good afternoon. We have a slide here called A Little Bit of History, and I'll throw in, as well as a little bit of history of technology and how we got here, a little bit of history of myself. But I want to begin this section here by reminding you what we even named and titled this webinar. And we named it Clearing the Fog, a Simple Path Forward. Let's be honest, every person on this call today, Davenport Group employees, Dell Technologies employees, and yourselves as our valued customers, we've all been in the industry long enough to know that the word simple and IT don't necessarily go hand in hand. Technology, historically speaking, technology has literally never been simple. But what has happened through the course of history is the complexity shifts from time to time. For example, in the very old days, programmers programmed using very complex things such as assembler code. And along the way, people developed more simpler and simpler programming languages that meant that we can now, we're now at the point literally where we can use things like AI to develop code for us, and the programming languages that they're using is decipherable and understandable even to a novice. So have we simplified programming? Not really. We've simplified it to the end coder, but there's still tremendous complexity somewhere behind the scenes to do all of that other workload. And that's always been the way that the IT has gone. And as it pertains to what we're talking about today, I want to discuss this fact that it's been said that the only thing that men learn from history is that men don't learn much from history. And so hopefully we don't be the people who repeat the errors of the past. And so we are hoping today that what we're going to do is use the experience of people like myself and Kevin to provide a little bit of clarity, because we've arrived at an unusual point in the industry. I think that it's fair to say April last year, 12 months ago, we had a lot more clarity in the industry. Things were a little more clear back then than what they are in April 2024. And the elephant in the room of why we have this quote unquote fog that we're trying to clear up here at the moment, a lot of the fog has been generated by the Broadcom acquisition of VMware. And so Azure Stack HCI, which we're going to be discussing today, provides one of the clearest and simplest paths forward for anyone that's looking at the situation thinking, I don't like what I see, or as in the case of a dense fog, I don't like what I don't see. If you're a fan of Far Side cartoons, which I certainly am, one of my favorite ever Far Side cartoons was drawn from the perspective of the pilot and a co-pilot in a plane looking out the windows of the plane, and there's clouds all around and two goats in the middle, and one of them says to the other, said, "Hey, why are there mountain goats way up here in the clouds?" I think we all know what was going to happen seconds later, and I feel that's how a lot of customers feel about their VMware technologies right now. So Azure Stack HCI is definitely a potential path for you to look at. That's what we wanted to talk about. But I've already mentioned this phrase half a dozen times, Azure Stack HCI. And so for anyone on the call today, if you hear us just sort of truncate that phrase to Azure Stack, I'm not trying to confuse you. We're trying to clear fog up here. So we might use terms interchangeably a little here, but it is important to understand and delineate that actually there is a technology called Azure Stack that has almost nothing to do with Azure Stack HCI. It's just they kept the same marketing names. Now, that's not trying to create complexity there, but it is what we're talking about today. What Kevin's going to show you in a while is the Azure Stack HCI. And what even is HCI? It is hyper-converged infrastructure. And why did hyper-converged infrastructure even come to market? Why is it here in the first place? It's here because traditional data centers were complicated. They were complicated when it came to doing code upgrades. You never knew, do I upgrade the storage first? Do I upgrade the servers first? Do I upgrade the switches first? If I'm going to upgrade the server, do I upgrade the server operating system, or do I apply the BIOS upgrade first? Or is it the firmware update on the host bus adapter before the BIOS on the server? You know how it goes. If you're listening in today, you're a technologist, you're like, yeah, I've trodden on that rake before. I went to do a simple code upgrade and the whole thing stuck its legs in the air and rolled over like a turtle because I found out that I didn't upgrade something in the correct order. And this was part of the promise of hyperconvergence. Hyperconvergence is an attempt. It's to have, as you can see on the screen, it's a software-defined IT infrastructure, virtualizes all of the elements of conventional hardware-defined systems. And that means that you're going to have, as you would have in a traditional VMware stack of vSphere, you're going to virtualize the computing. You're going to, and when we say computing, we mean CPU and memory specifically. You're going to have a hyperconvergence takes that one step further and says, let's get rid of the SAN, whether it be a Dell SAN or a competitor SAN. Let's get rid of the SAN and let's have software-defined storage that's internal to the servers. And then let's virtualize not all of the networking, You can't virtualize 100% of networking. If anyone ever tells you that you can, tell me what switch you're going to plug this system into. It has to be plugged into a physical network somewhere along the way. But hyperconvergence, you virtualize as much of the network as you can, and a good HCI system will run on commercial off-the-shelf servers. Now, the third bullet point is an interesting one. That sounds like not much more than a software-defined data center. And that was a big buzz phrase in the industry 10 or 12 years ago. Everyone was talking about software-defined data centers. We're all going to be running software-defined data centers. And to a certain extent we are, but hyperconvergence has sort of shifted what people used to think a software-defined data center was. And I'll point out the last bullet point there is this is a Davenport group and Smoker opinion that a true HCI solution should inherently include unified, simplified lifecycle management. The goal being one-click upgrades. Not all HCI systems. It is not our. It is a Davenport Group company policy that we do not criticize quote unquote competitors. So you won't hear me rubbishing anyone else's product today and go, I'm not going to say, oh, theirs is terrible. Their hardware upgrades are an entirely separate process from their software upgrades. I'm not going to criticize them, but if you do find out, what the alternatives are out there, some of them do not have this idea of one-click upgrade down pat very well just yet. So that's a brief overview of what a HCI system is all about. I will pause at this point. We're going to look at the state of the industry in just a minute. But over to you for a question. Anyone seen a presentation on Azure Stack before?
And this will help us, folks, because Ben's going to, again, talk a little bit about where we are, state of industry right now, impacts of Broadcom, and then go into a little presentation of Azure Stack. But we will certainly cater it to what you guys may or may not have already heard.
Is the poll question working for other people? Because
yeah, I know that I submitted one for yes. So there was another person in there for yes, but it seems like the majority of folks have not heard about Azure Stack. So I think we're in a good position to have that as a level set. And then I also know there's a Dell member here, so maybe perhaps that person's heard of Azure Stack as well. Thank you all for the participation. We'll keep moving on.
Okay, good deal. Current state of the industry. The elephant in the room is Broadcom. The Broadcom acquisition of VMware has been bumpy. As customers, you've been hearing some pretty horror stories about what the cost of software renewals look like. We have these conversations usually multiple times each day. I'm dealing with this a lot. If you ask me, what's VMware going to look like for me, the first thing I would tell you is it may not be as bad as some of the horror stories you're seeing, but depending on what VMware products you have, it could be a little bit interesting. Of course, VMware are the elephant in the room of the hyperconvergence industry. They own the dominant market share. They are larger than any other hyperconverged infrastructure player, even though they weren't the first to market with hyperconvergence. Nutanix invented the concept and architecture of hyperconvergence back in the year 2009. And that's not my opinion, that's a historical fact. They came first to market in 2009 and others followed. VMware, you have the choice of vSAN and you also, so vSAN ready nodes, but you also have Dell's premium vSAN based product called VxRail. And it's been a tremendously popular seller over the years. But the path forwards is it's becoming more clear what it is, but it's not necessarily what everyone wants. The hyperconvergence industry, the industry is going to go through a really interesting period. My second dot point, survival of the fittest. Hyperflex did not survive. Cisco were a little bit late to market with their product Hyperflex. But like I said, it's a company policy. We don't criticize the competition. I think that because Hyperflex is no longer available, it's therefore technically no longer competition. So maybe I'm free to criticize it all I like, but it didn't resonate well with the industry. It didn't succeed. And if you think about why that may have been the case, the software stack wasn't tremendously strong. I'm not trying to be critical, but also the Cisco UCS hardware that it relied upon was inherently more expensive than many of the competitors, and therefore they struggled to compete on price. If you want to, if you're going to have a premium price on your product, then it needs to be a premium offering, and yet the software aspect was letting it down and falling a little short. There are some new emerging players at the moment. We're not going to talk about all of the other products that are out there in the space today, but I will say this. If I had $1 for every time someone said to me, I'm going Proxmox, I wouldn't be ready to send my 17-year-old off to college yet with all of those dollars that I'd collected, but I've heard it a lot. I'm going off to Proxmox. The Davenport Group opinion on that is, people say when it comes to cutting wood, measure twice, cut once. I'd recommend before you go doing anything rash like that, measure at least half a dozen times before you start cutting the wood. The support ecosystems are not very strong for these things. A lot of these emerging players right now that people are talking about, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. The support ecosystems, in a lot of cases, even if you pay for support, it's send us an email if your system is down and we promise to respond within 24 hours. That's not, that, in my opinion, that's not ready for state and local government. That's not ready for small businesses. That's not ready for medium-sized businesses. That's not ready for enterprise. No one can afford to have a system where your data center, when leadership say, are we down? Why are we down? How long are we going to be down? If your answer is, I don't know how long we're going to be down, but they promise that they respond to my email within 24 hours, that's a career limiting move for you to have purchased that decision. So some of these new players, some of them will lift their game and get better. Some of them will fall by the wayside. Realistically, if you say, but I've got problems right here, right now, what can I do? Maybe run with the herd. Avoid stampedes is a good way of thinking about it as well. And let's have a look today at what the option is that we're going to be talking about, which is going to be Azure Stack HCI. Let's move into the next slide. All right, here's some trends in the industry, and in just a fairly soon now we're going to be handing over to Kevin. And by the way, if you're wondering, why do we have two engineers here on the call today? It's like this. I'm a pre-sales guy. I'm like a teacher in that sense. And if there's any teachers listening in, please don't be offended by what I'm about to say. It's just my Australian sense of humor. They say that those that can do and those that can't teach. I'm a pre-sales guy. I'm like the teacher. But Kevin is a real engineer. Kevin's a hands-on delivery and installation and configuration engineer. And so while us pre-sales people sometimes will talk about, well, it can do this, it can do that, because we've been trained up on all of the marketing stuff, Kevin will tell you for real whether it can or not, whether it can or can't, because he's the guy that comes out and does the installations for you. But in the market for hyperconvergence, everyone's looking to simplify and transform IT. I tell you this, what's been happening over the last few years is every business, every industry, every government agency has effectively, through digital transformation, everyone wants an app for everything. And that means that basically instead of, an organization in years gone by, you had 800 people and maybe 40 people in an IT department. Now you have 800 people that are all touching IT. And yet the actual IT department never gained any more resources, even though there's all these new apps being developed and integrated all the time. And we have to simplify the data center itself in order to be able to move at the speed that the business and the organization is moving. Edge computing, that is to say, more and more needs to happen, and there's so much data getting used nowadays that not everything can be backhauled to a traditional data center to be processed. Sometimes we're having to have applications and systems at the edge of the network where the decision can be made there rather than backhauling it through wide area networks or even wireless and 5G networks and things like that. So edge computing is, and that plays into Azure Stack HCI. They've got some edge offerings there in some cases that might work for some things. Hybrid cloud. When we say hybrid cloud, what we mean is you have something on-prem, you still have some hardware, you still have a data center. It might just be, it might be a couple of servers in a wiring closet with a couple of switches, but it's still an on-prem data center, even if it's not gigantic. But then you've got some presence in Azure, AWS, or Google, or whatever it might be, public cloud, or even in a colo facility. That's the concept there of a hybrid cloud. And people are at the point now where they're saying, I need to be able to move workloads between my on-prem and my private cloud. Or some people are saying, I need to have the application primarily running on-prem, but I need to be able to fail over to a public cloud instance if my on-prem fails. These are hybrid cloud conversations. And then cloud native, everything is becoming cloud native, and it's changing the industry. Cloud native adoption really is changing the industry. So that's this is where hyperconvergence can really help you as we move forwards. So let's move on to the next screen here. And is this the one? No, it's the next one. I'll be handing off to Kevin real soon. All I'm doing in this is I'm preparing Kevin firstly, but you guys out there, you customers, I'm whetting your appetite. Give me a taste of Kevin. What's he got to say to us today? Let's introduce. This is an introduction to Azure Stack HCI. What actually is it, and what can it do for me? Azure Stack HCI, it does come in a few different software flavors at the moment. Some of this is changing over the course of the next year or so. But for all intents and purposes, if you've ever used an Azure environment, and almost everyone's seen Azure, even if you're not actively running in Azure nowadays, you've probably seen that, what you can do in the cloud is really, really easy. It's sort of click, 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 click. Oh, there's my new virtual machine, or there's my new workload, or I provision new storage very rapidly. I've added a whole new VLAN very easily. Here's my IP addresses. The promise of what you can do in an Azure environment, Azure Stack HCI allows you to do that on-prem within your own data center. So if you've ever seen any hyperconverged solution before, and I will throw a few names out there before, if you've ever looked at Nutanix before and thought, oh, that's easy, or if you've ever looked at or had a Dell VxRail system before and said, oh, I like that, that simplifies things. Azure Stack is basically allowing you to do that on-prem, but it's almost like using cloud native tools to manage it. And any Microsoft or Azure skills that you have, this is a key consideration, the Microsoft skills and Azure skills that you have today are going to be relevant in your day two operations in an Azure Stack environment. So that's a brief overview, and now we'll move on to our next slide. And I think, Kevin, we finally are ready for you now.
All right, thanks, Ben. Well, everybody, thanks for joining. As Ben gave me a good introduction, I am a deployment engineer. I do a lot of the configuration, the day-to-day upgrades and maintenance that occasionally our customers need help with. So I've pretty much seen and touched it all. So that's why they wanted to bring me in on this webinar. So as what Ben said, Azure Stack HCI, the way that Dell has decided to partner with Microsoft with this kind of integrated solution, it really does a good marrying of on-prem and the Azure cloud services. And a few of those, they just kind of talk about bullet points here, but to name a few that you may be familiar with if you've used any Azure cloud services, you've got Azure Monitor, Azure Insights. Both of those are effectively an aggregator slash artificial intelligence engine that are constantly monitoring your systems, your virtual machines, your hosts, everything in the cluster to see if there are any benefits that can be had from making any configuration changes or any tweaks to your cluster, or even some of the workloads that are running on it. And it can be very helpful when you are running one of these clusters. It gives you some good insights, hence the name. You get to use the Azure security baselines. So in Azure, you have what's called Microsoft Defender for Cloud And then underneath that, you have security baselines that can be applied using Azure policy to all the nodes in your cluster, all the VMs inside your cluster based on a Microsoft standard or for security compliance. I think it has 241 different items that it enforces or at least will audit for once it's been applied to your cluster, and can be really, really beneficial to really do a deep dive of what your cluster has going on security wise. Another really good benefit, Ben mentioned this a little bit before, say about needing to failover a workload from on-prem into the cloud. Azure Site Recovery is something that you may be familiar with, but it is a fairly seamlessly integrated disaster recovery solution that is tied directly into Azure Stack HCI and through the Azure Cloud Portal. You can deploy it to every single VM or every workload, or selectively exclude certain VMs on your cluster, and it will automatically have you, once you've configured it, upload your data into your recovery services vault and just replicate synchronously every data block that's changed. And then should you have an issue where you need to fail over, you can snap your fingers, click a button, and in about a minute, you're going to have your um, your VMs in Azure stood up and working based on what the data you already had on-prem. So it's a really nice disaster recovery tool that Microsoft has, and Azure Stack HCI has that integrated into it. Kind of touched on Microsoft Defender for Cloud, but you can gain a lot of insights as to your security portfolio using the Defender for Cloud. Azure Stack HCI comes with, I think, what's called the Foundational Cloud Security Portfolio Manager. You can pay for one that's a higher tier and gives you a lot more information, but at a glance, it'll take a look and see if you don't have secured core turned on or BIOS level protections enabled for your cluster and your hosts. One of the cool things about Azure Stack HCI and the way it's being integrated into the Azure cloud is you've got, if you're familiar with remote desktop services or terminal services, Microsoft has had the Windows Virtual Desktop for a few years, and they renamed it to Azure Virtual Desktop for a VDI solution. And it is now, with Azure Stack HCI build 23H2, going to be integrated where you can have your session hosts running locally on-prem with your cluster, and then utilizing the Microsoft hosted Azure Cloud Portal for the virtual desktop solution. So that way you don't have to set up your RDS gateway, your broker, or just even the RDS web portal. That's already going to be done for you from the Azure portal side, and Microsoft is maintaining that. So that's just a cool little integration that is constantly being developed from Microsoft and would be available to you with an Azure Stack HCI cluster. Lifecycle management. One of the things that Ben mentioned that around what makes the benefits of HCI so real is just how one-click upgradable it can be. And Dell has worked really hard hand in hand with Microsoft to have add-on or extension integrations with Windows Admin Center, so that you can just go to an update section within the Windows Admin Center, look at all your OS updates, select them, click next, and then look at all your hardware updates for your firmware, click next, and it will dynamically pause any nodes or put them in maintenance mode, move all your VM workloads off of it, make sure nothing else can move to it, and then it will do all of the updates intelligently in the right order, and then bring it back up, wait for the everything to settle out, and then move on to the next node, so that you see no downtime and no outages to your workloads. It's pretty neat. I've actually watched it work many times now, and it's pretty nice to see when you've got that working the way they actually tell you to on the tin. And then finally, one of the things I wanted to talk about is having the Azure Stack HCI with Dell means you get access to Dell engineers, and or myself, if you want to have us help you with it, for any issues you're having with your day-to-day configuration, things are not working the way you expect, you're hitting some errors. You can contact Dell and talk to some of their principal engineers, and they have a backline connection to Microsoft for any technical support and consultation, so that you don't have to be the one trying to reach out and get a hold of somebody in Microsoft, which, if you've ever opened a Microsoft ticket, can be a little tricky and take a long time. So You know, the benefits for having the Dell Azure Stack HCI, or the Dell integrated system. No, what's it called now? The Apex Cloud Platform for Microsoft Azure is the new name for this deployment style coming up this year. So there's a lot of good things that come along with it, and it's pretty neat technology. Ben,
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate that. Let's look at the next slide. I love that first word, accelerate. I have a reputation for talking all day, so I'm going to focus right now on acceleration, and that is accelerating the presentation so that we get to the point where you can actually see the demonstration. How do you like that? We'll accelerate the presentation to get to the demonstration. On the topic of acceleration, on the first point on the left, validated workload solutions to accelerate time to value. That's what everyone's about. How long, you know, it's expensive to buy a new data center solution, but the word expense can be offset by value. How much value does it bring, and how long is it going to take to realize that value? We actually had a scenario the first time I personally worked on an Azure Stack HCI solution was done directly with Kevin. A Dell customer had purchased an Azure Stack HCI solution from an integration partner. Unfortunately, and I won't name them and shame them, but I'll tell you the story. The integration partner didn't know how to deploy Azure Stack HCI properly, tried for a period of months, couldn't get it up and running. And don't be scared by that. Remember, I said technology has always been complicated, but where the complexity lies, that shifts. The whole idea of Azure Stack HCI is to give you, the end user, a simple system. That doesn't mean that the setup is easy, but that's why you have Kevin. Kevin goes out there and he does the complex stuff and sets it up. So this customer who had bought a solution but hadn't been able to get it up and running, they went to Dell and said, get me a partner that knows how to do this. Dell came to Davenport Group. We sent Kevin out there. I believe it was in the state of Virginia. Kevin, nod. Did you get to drive up to Virginia for that one? Is that where it was?
Yes, if it's the company and starting with the letter K that you're thinking
Yes,
of.
that's yep. The one. Yeah. Yep. So we sent Kevin drove him up to Virginia for that one. And within the first few days that he was there, he had the system up and running. The following Monday morning, the customer was ready to start migrating workloads onto the system, and they have fallen in love with their Azure Stack HCI cluster. They rave about Kevin. They rave about Davenport Group and what we did to help them, but they rave about the product and how well it works for them. They finally saw the value of the solution. GPU, we're going to hit on GPU in a minute. AI is the buzzword at the moment. Everyone's talking about AI. Can you do AI workloads on an Azure Stack HCI solution? The answer is not just yes, you can, but you can do it and do it very, very well, because we have GPU ready solutions. We've got a slide that will show you about that. If you're aware of what's happening in the world of AI, everyone's jumping on the bandwagon. Everyone's buying some hardware. Everyone's buying some software. They don't know what to do with it yet, but everyone's like, get me some AI, get me some AI. We'll figure out the use cases later. And so it's created a supply chain problem. We're going to address that in just a minute. And when it comes to edge optimized configurations, that is, I need something small and simple, but it can't just be a single server that falls over and dies all by itself. I need some high availability out there at the edge. We have some solutions there with Azure Stack HCI as well. So we can move on to the next slide. Some use cases. You want a modern data center. We're talking about the speed in the data center. I grew up in the industry in the 1990s. I grew up as a DOS 3.3, as in Microsoft DOS 3.3, 4.01, IBM OS 2. We were all command line driven back in those days. And if you knew, all of the command line options, /S/E/V, do this. And that was where our value was. Our value was that as IT people, we could do complex stuff behind the scenes that other people didn't understand. That's no longer the value of IT people. The value of IT people now is, how can you solve my business problems? And if you've got a complex data center and you're wasting time in that complex data center, you can't solve people's business problems. Azure Stack HCI will get you out of data center complexity into modern infrastructure that's easy to use. If you need to do VDI, it's a great way of doing VDI, regardless of whether you want to do it with Horizon or Citrix or Microsoft's VDI solutions. And that, by the way, that would make a ton of sense. Have a Microsoft stack running Azure Stack HCI, doing Microsoft VDI, that would make a ton of sense. Edge solutions, it's great. Microsoft applications, and if you're doing DevOps or anything like that, it's great there as well. I think that's less likely to be relevant to the people on the call today. Let's keep moving, Kylie. And I got a funny feeling the next slide. Okay, excellent, good. We did take that one out. There was one that I didn't even want to hit on. So look at that. Kylie is so on top of her game. Okay, we're going to move fairly quickly through this. Here's what I want you to get out of what you're seeing right here, right now. Don't try and memorize it. Suffice to say that there is an Azure Stack HCI node type for every scenario. If you need quote unquote cheap, small and cheap, we've got solutions there. If you need vast amounts of storage in a solution or vast amounts of horsepower, we got a solution there. If you need relatively inexpensive storage, we can help you out there. But if you need blazing fast storage, we can help you out there. The one on the right, I'll tell you, this is the one that catches everyone's eye, and this is the one that's least likely for most customers to actually need. But we all tend to focus and get excited about those things. We all get excited every time a Lamborghini drives past us on the interstate as well, but none of us are ever likely to own the Lamborghini. But the one on the right is really interesting. If you said, I've got a compute requirement and it can't sit inside a data center and it needs to go somewhere where it's not going to get love, care, and attention, that rugged one on the right, the MC4000, that could be a really cool option for you. So let's keep moving along from there. By the way, the complexity of what type do I need, that's where you work with me. That's my job as a pre-sales person. That's where I provide value. You tell me what your workload is. You tell me what your use case is. I'll figure out what type of nodes you need. Drew will figure out how much it's going to cost to get it in your hands, and Kevin will come out and install it. And that's the life cycle of how it works. I help you design it. Drew helps you figure out how to afford it. Kevin helps you get it installed in your data center. So once again, we see there's lots of different node types, lots of different options and stuff that you can add in. Let's move on to the next one. That's the 660 series. We've got the next one, the 760 series. You can see that they focus on all-flash solutions or GPU-based solutions, NVMe, even hybrid. When we say hybrid, we're talking about things where you're using some SSD to cache, and then you're using spinning hard disks to provide a more value point in terms of how many terabytes per how many dollars I have available. So we've got those hybrid solutions as well. And then we'll move on again into the GPU. I mentioned a minute ago that everyone's demand for AI is creating a supply chain problem. Now, some of the HCI competitors out there, some of the other organizations, Dell have always been good at supply chain management. Dell's supply chain has always been good. Now, in the worst of COVID, I think we all understand that the world's supply chain for technology got a bit ugly. But Dell were at the forefront, and you can see here there is a choice of NVIDIA GPU cards available to you in the Azure Stack HCI solution. So where some HCI solutions have limitations because they might only have access to one type of GPU card, we've got a variety of them here. We can work with you to figure out what you need and what's available to you as well. And then we'll move on again. There's a slide here on lifecycle management. I've hit on this already. Kevin's hit on this already. We don't need to spend much time on this. The whole idea is that you can upgrade your entire stack in a pretty much it's a one-click upgrade. Here's the components I want my upgrade. Go do it, Azure Stack HCI, and off it goes and gets things done for you. So let's move on from there. We must be just about, security. I think we're just about ready to actually look at the demo in just a second with Kevin, but security, how secure is this system? There's been a lot of forethought put into Azure Stack HCI. You can do data at rest encryption. Let's be honest, data at rest encryption is less about security and more about compliance, but it is an important consideration, particularly if where you sit the physical hardware is at risk of someone breaking in and stealing the hardware. You need to have that data at rest encryption. And Kevin talked about the fact that Microsoft Defender is included in the solution. There's specific hardening guides available if you need to do, Department of defense grade hardening. There are STIG compliance guides available for it as well. So it's a very secure and well thought out solution. So that's all I got to say on security. If you're interested in knowing more, reach out to us. And I think at this point, does this mean day 2 administration? We're ready for Kevin to show his demo now. Fantastic.
I think so.
All yours, Kevin.
Yep. Thank you, Ben. We get to what I consider the most important part of the presentation, my part. If you'll go to the next slide for me. So when you're deploying Azure Stack HCI with the Dell Apex Cloud platform, one of the cool things we talked about for lifecycle management was the Dell extensions for Windows Admin Center. And kind of what you're seeing here, this is one of the blades that you'll see in Windows Admin Center under the Dell Open Manage integration plugins or extension. And this gives you kind of at a glance, some pretty graphics and also some of the configuration information around your nodes. So you can just kind of take a look, get some service tags if you need to grab them. Next slide, please. Again, this is just so you can see all your drives. You can click on it graphically and then have it pull up all the information for the physical drives. Just for an easier GUI way of doing it, instead of having to kind of dive through certain menus, you've got this kind of viewpoint. Next slide. And just here is the back. This is just the physical view section of the extension. My demo is not actually Dell hardware. It is an Azure Stack HCI cluster hosted in Azure, but it is running the newest build that the MC nodes will be running, Azure Stack HCI OS 23H2. Okay, I don't think we have any more slides for this. I think it'll be my turn to start sharing. All right. Okay. So let me know when this is, I think we should be able to see this.
You're good, Kevin.
All right. Thanks, Drew. So right off the bat, this is an Azure Stack HCI cluster from the Azure portal perspective. And 23H2 is the build that is validated and supported on the new MC nodes going forward. And it was released in February of this year by Microsoft and is the new de facto build of Azure Stack HCI OS. That does not mean that the 22H2 builds have been deprecated, but they are no longer going to be pushing new feature sets to it. One of the key takeaways from running Azure Stack HCI is you are required to have the newest build lagging by up to 180 days. So if you have not upgraded your nodes, your operating system to a build within the last 180 days, Microsoft technically would not consider you within support. Dell will probably help you upgrade, much like anytime you call support and they say, have you updated your firmware? For the very first question they ever talk to you about. So that's what will probably end up happening. You just need to make sure you stay on top of things. But this is the dashboard when you're looking at things from the Azure portal, and 23H2 is very Azure cloud forward. You still have access to the RSAT tools. You still have access to Windows Admin Center. One of the cool things you have here is you can actually connect to Windows Admin Center and your nodes from the Azure portal down into your cluster. And so this should load here in a second. But it just gives you the ability just to pull up all the stuff you're used to with Windows Admin Center. If you're used to it. If this is new to you, that's fine. When we come out and deploy it for you, I'll give you a full rundown and tutorial on how to use it. This is taking a little while. I'm not sure why. I swear I just had it clicked open not 3 minutes ago, and now all of a sudden it's going slow. So I'm just going to come back out of this. When you're looking at your dashboard, you have the availability of at a glance seeing your nodes from the cloud. You can see your hosts. You can see that Azure Arc is connected. Azure Arc is the agent that is installed on your host nodes. It is installed on all the VMs inside the cluster by default, and it is what helps bring together the integration between your cluster on-prem and the Azure cloud. You can see your cores, memory, kind of at a glance stuff. Next little bit you have is monitoring. You can see if you have any alerts that have come up in the last 24 hours. This cluster has not had any. You can look at a bunch of your metrics that if you just want to take at a glance, see how your cluster is doing. And finally, the last tab is capabilities. This is if you wanted to actually have some of the integrations we talked about earlier. Azure Insights, the Windows Admin Center, disaster recovery. This is Azure Site Recovery, and then health alerts is part of the Azure Monitor and Azure Insights. So 1 second, here we go. Yeah, so Azure Virtual Desktop, ASR, or Kubernetes is also something that can be deployed. Sometimes it pops up here as a capability that you can have if you're doing any containerization. That's another one of those definite use cases for running Azure Stack HCI in your environment. It does really good at utilizing Kubernetes as your orchestration manager. So when you have somebody like myself come out on site and do a deployment with 23H2, it is, again, as I said, very cloud forward. So the deployment is actually fairly simple, kind of to what Ben was talking about earlier, in that I come on site, I make sure the nodes get online, I make sure they're on their network, I make sure I register them with the Azure portal in a very limited way, and then you actually will come into the Azure portal and you'll actually create a new cluster from the Azure portal. And then that will ask you to put in a bunch of information. You tell what resource group you have already subscribed the nodes to. And you can see I had a few others from another cluster I have set up. And this is how you'd actually create the cluster in the Azure portal. And once that is kicked off, you get to look at this lovely little deployment section. And this takes a while. I would say this probably takes um, the deployment wizard here would, or start and stop times would have you believe it takes about 2.5 hours, but I've still seen it take at least 4 to 5. But that's why you have us come on site to help you with it, just to make sure there's nothing that goes wrong. But it goes through and does all this stuff. Make sure it encrypts your CSVs, encrypts your OS volume for BitLocker, configures your networking, does all the stuff that you really want. Applying Windows Defender application control policy. So bunch of cool stuff that gets deployed right off the bat, kind of that not quite one touch, but very simple implementation. So you've got access still as let me just kind of quickly go through here. When you are managing your cluster with 23H2 and Azure Stack HCI, this is where you can look at all your Azure Arc VMs that have been deployed. And the way to deploy them is actually from the Azure Cloud Portal nowadays for build 23H2. 22H2 and earlier, you can deploy it through Windows Admin Center and register it with the portal. You can still do that with 23H2, but you will be missing out on a few feature sets, or at least features that Microsoft is targeting at the Azure Arc VMs that are natively created. But the way you do it is you would pre-stage a VM image. And this is something I think is pretty cool in that you can create an image and push it from the Azure Marketplace. If you know there's an image in Azure that you would like to use, so you're used to it, you can actually push it from Azure on-prem into your cluster. And then that image will be maintained and updated. And it will you can then deploy your virtual machines off of that. One of the things that I always think, kind of talking back to VMware and Broadcom, things I always really liked about VMware was the templating system. I could spin up an entire cluster and 30 or 50 VMs and just followed my templates and just really just rattle off a whole bunch of VMs with that. With Azure Stack HCI and the Azure portal, you can do that too. You can either programmatically do it with the Azure Resource Manager and PowerShell, or you can just quickly start deploying them from the portal itself. So it's pretty cool. You get to have access to a lot of that different stuff and a lot of different feature sets that you would not normally have been able to see. You can see with logical networks, if you need to deploy a new VLAN, any additional data disks for any of your virtual machines on-prem is where this will kind of at a glance show you what they are. Disaster recovery here. This was purely Azure Site Recovery. I don't have this deployed for the cluster. Updates. This is where you can from the portal actually deploy updates. You can look at the Update Management Center in Azure and look at all your VMs in your cluster and manage the updates through that. And if you're paying for Azure Stack HCI, it is a subscription model that automatically licenses all the VM workloads on the cluster to gain access to all the little goodies of the Azure integration without having to pay a separate like $5 per workload for Azure Arc integration for certain features. One last thing that I wanted to kind of touch on, there's plenty here to kind of go through, but we're running short on time. So if you really want to see something more in depth, we can always have a separate one-on-one conversation. If you just talk to Drew or David, we can get a scheduled session set up. I just want to show you here that this is my virtual machine. This is how I have my Azure Stack HCI cluster deployed. And here's my cluster. I'm using the failover cluster manager, and I can still see all the same stuff you're used to if you've ever deployed a Hyper-V cluster before. You can take a look at all your roles. Azure Stack HCI does have a bunch of roles that get deployed by it for orchestration, but it's not very much different under the hood if you're used to deploying this stuff. When you come down to the nitty gritty of it, you can even come to your nodes and you can always put them in maintenance mode or pause and drain them from here. So yeah, RSAT tool is still available. You can still manage it. You can still maintain it. Azure Stack HCI OS is core only effectively, so you do not have a GUI. If you RDP into it, you'll just be given a command prompt with sconfig, similar to Windows Server Core. But yeah, again, if you have anything else you'd like to see, please reach out to David or Drew.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yep.
Yeah, I gave Ben and Kevin Mission Impossible. I said I want to talk about Broadcom, and I also want to provide a demo of Azure Stack. What you guys just saw, there are some new features here that haven't been available to current Azure Stack customers, being that we got your insight that you guys aren't familiar with Azure Stack. We kind of just tailored it as this is just a demo and it's new to everyone here. But these guys did a wonderful job getting a lot presented to you all within just 1 hour. But I know from conversations with each, we're talking about the cost of VMware renewals. And I think this idea of what else is out there is top of mind for you all. And we'd love to continue this conversation of exploring Azure Stack. If the impact of VMware's renewal to you all is going to be too large to overcome, we want to be able to help explore other options. And we think Azure Stack is one of them. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we do have a raffle, so I'll let Kylie, share her screen and spin a magic wheel here. Lauren, Puka, congratulations. I can follow up with you after
That's what I'm
this.
talking about, y'all.
That's it.
how you
That's
do
it,
it.
buddy. The summer's coming.
That's a
Get
slam
the ice
dunk.
ready.
I had that plan from the beginning.
All righty. Well, thank you all for staying on with us. We appreciate your time. Thank you, Kevin and Ben, for an excellent job going through your content, getting all of this ready for us. Thank you for the marketing team for helping us coordinate and presenting this to our customers. Y'all have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for joining, folks.
Bye.